Welcome back everyone to a new episode of Governance This Week. With me in the studio is Philip Stevens, an acclaimed author and historian, expert in geopolitics, and also contributing editor for the Financial Times. Philip is also a senior fellow here at the School of Transnational Governance. Welcome, Philip. Great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be back in Florence.
Excellent. So let's delve straight into some issues, and today we're going to look at the US in particular and some recent developments. And let's start actually with the visit of US President Joe Biden to Ireland.
Okay. Well, for Joe Biden and Ireland, you see a sort of the personal merge into the diplomatic, merge into the political. So his visit this week covered all three. If you take the personal, he's only the second American president of Catholic Irish ancestry, the first with John F. Kennedy, and Biden has always taken that ancestry very seriously. He was one of the hundreds of, or his ancestors were among the hundreds of thousands who travelled from Ireland, in Biden's case from the west of Ireland to the United States during the 1840s and 50s, the time of the Great Famine in Ireland. And it's often said that Irish Americans are more Irish than the Irish, and in the case of Biden's family, that's certainly true. So his trip this week, covering Northern Ireland and the Republic, and more time in the Republic, has that personal element. Then there's the diplomatic. American presidents, particularly Bill Clinton, have always been engaged in Irish politics, and during the latter part of the 20th century, during the period of the so-called Troubles, the effective civil war in Northern Ireland, in trying to bring the two sides together. Clinton was a pivotal player in urging both on the Republican side, the armed Republicans, and the pro-British Unionists to get together, get a political settlement. Subsequent presidents carry in that tradition, both Bush and Obama. So Biden clearly went to Northern Ireland to celebrate or to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And that was the moment in 1998 when the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, the Provisional IRA, laid down its arms and a new power-sharing assembly was set up between Republicans, nationalists and unionists. So Biden was there to say, look, we in the US still have a big interest in this and are still supporting this institution. Then there's the political, and that's to do with his longer visit to the Republic of Ireland. The Irish diaspora in the United States is very powerful historically, politically, very strong in states like Pennsylvania, which count in American elections. And also Irish Americans are emblematic of the sort of working class, middle working, hard working class voters that the swing voters that Biden will be looking for in the next election if he stands. Well, as he says, he's going to stand as president. So you wrap all those things together. There'll be lots of important photo calls, opportunities he'll take back. So it's an important trip. Just as an addenda, it's interesting he's not taking the trouble to visit the UK or Britain, London during this trip. So there's a signal there.
Interesting. Philip, I was wondering, of course, there's clearly a lot of interest on the side of Biden in Ireland and the situation in Northern Ireland. Interest, but does the US also have influence over what is happening there at the moment?
It does have influence. It has, one of the breakthroughs in the 1990s was when Bill Clinton gave Jerry Adams, then a leader of the Provisional IRA, a visa to go to the United States. And subsequently, when the IRA said we're willing to talk peace, invited him to the White House. That invitation to the White House for nationalists, Republicans and unionists really matters. Like much of the world, people in Northern Ireland, in Ireland, in are in awe of the American president. So he has some clout. He has economic influence too. I mean, I think Biden this week was talking about if there are problems in the political process in Belfast at the moment, and Biden was saying, look, put them back on track and we'll get American investment into Northern Ireland. There's a hell of a lot of American investment already in the Republic of Ireland, more to come. So yeah, there is real economic influence, but there is also that intangible but very important political influence that comes with being president of the most powerful nation in the world.
Yeah. You actually mentioned the United Kingdom before. What does all of this mean in light of Brexit? What has been the impact so far on Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Well, one of the problems in Northern Ireland in the last few years centred on very complicated trading arrangements between Northern Ireland and the European Union, which flow from the Brexit decision, from Britain's desire to leave. And they're complicated because the peace agreement says there's got to be an open border between the Republic of Ireland and the North, and if you like, aligning that with Britain leaving the EU became really complicated. Unionists were pressing for Britain to renege on the deal that it actually struck with Brussels. Under previous Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, it looked like Britain was going to renege. That caused great anger in Brussels and considerable anger in Washington as well. I think the message that Biden has been sending throughout his presidency, and Rishi Sunak, the present Prime Minister, has now done a deal with Brussels to get this back on the road. But Biden has been very clear in saying, if you, the British Prime Minister, want a good relationship with the White House, then you've got to have a deal for Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland that the European Union is comfortable with. So he's been using his, if you like, negative influence there to pressurise the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak into doing a deal. And you could say it's worked.
Yeah. So in the end, quite a meaningful visit in Ireland this week. But let's have a look at a few other headlines concerning the United States this week. For example, the one where involving actually UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. According to leaked documents, Guterres is, from the perspective of the United States, too willing to accommodate Russian interests. Philip, what is the fuzz about in this case?
Well, we've had this flood of leaks, secret documents from the US, from the intelligence services, which have covered all sorts of things. They've been appearing online in odd forums, and they've covered everything from the state of play in the Ukraine war, the strength of the Russian forces, the needs of the Ukrainian forces, to US policy towards South Korea, and this particular one, the US views of the work of the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, at the start of in the early months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when Moscow imposed effectively a grain embargo on Ukraine. This caused huge problems for many, huge increases in food prices across the world, and particular problems for many of the poorest countries in the world, particularly in Africa. And Guterres moved in as a sort of mediator to try to get the Russians to reopen the Black Sea and allow Ukrainian grain shipments to start again. And he was successful. It was a strong diplomatic mission. But you can imagine, and I'm not surprised, that the Americans, who had a rather different perspective, of course they wanted the grain to flow again, but they also wanted the pressure to be maintained on Russia. This was, Russia's invasion was a gross violation of international law and norms, and the US wanted economic pressure to be maintained. So what you see here is the tension between in this leak between an administration that, on the one hand, didn't want to let Russia off the hook, and a Secretary General of the United Nations who saw his responsibility as rather broader, of course not helping Russia, but on the other hand facilitating the re-export or the big resumption of exports of Ukrainian grain, wheat, which is absolutely essential for many of the poorest countries. So I don't think Guterres comes out badly at all, and in a strange way you can see this as a sort of natural diplomatic tension between two parties.
Yeah. But at the United Nations, they of course weren't very pleased with the revelations. Could this have an impact on the relationships between the US and the UN?
No, and I think, look, the UN has many problems at the moment, not least that Russia is currently chairing the Security Council, which is, as someone who has violated as a country that's violated the UN Charter by invading Ukraine and taking its territory, it's rather odd that it should be chairing. So there are lots of problems. The US spies on the UN. Russia spies on the UN. I would be very surprised if Britain didn't spy. Everyone spies on the UN because they want to try and find out what other countries are doing. So I think this is more a diplomatic squall rather than a diplomatic storm.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on from spy game to another topic, because in fact earlier this week President Joe Biden, during the Easter egg roll, actually said that he plans on running, but not actually making an official confirmation that he would do that. And of course, it's not the first time that there are hints at a re-election campaign. What should we this hesitancy to make an official announcement? Should we read anything into that? Are there surprises upcoming, or is it just part of the game?
I think it's part of the game. I think that, I think Joe Biden actually is being quite smart here. Those close to him say it's his definite intention to run. But the election is another 18 months away. Primaries don't start for another 10 months or so. So there's no need. The Republican Party has a difficult choice to make. Trump's in the lead, but many for the candidacy, but many Republicans think that Trump can't win the presidency. So I think what Biden's doing, there are questions about a Biden candidacy, most obviously the one about his age. I think he would be, at the end of a second term, I think he would be 86, which is quite... On the other hand, Trump is, 4 years younger, so it's not... So I think what Biden is doing is saying, look, assuming I keep my good health, assuming there's no great, there's nothing that extraordinary happens, that I'm going to stand. But there's no reason for me to declare now. That's also because there's no other... I've heard when I've been in Washington, Democrats say, well, Biden's too old and we've got to find someone else. But the fact is, there isn't an alternative to Biden in the Democratic Party at the moment, or not an obvious one. I'm sure, if something terrible happened to the president, a candidate would emerge, but there isn't anyone who could obviously challenge him. So I think Biden is being quite smart, and the focus remains on the Republicans and on this, really quite difficult struggle within the Republican Party, which is, on the one hand, feels that it still has to stick with Trump, but on the other hand, think that Trump's a loser. Yeah. So, I think in a way, Biden is saying, well, look, why don't I sit back and enjoy the spectacle?
And he, of course, can do so also coming from a position of strength, as his performance so far has been very solid, of course.
Yeah, and he's put in very strong performances internationally in, for example, in managing the West's response to Ukraine. Domestically, there are still some economic problems, but we've seen, recently now inflation coming right down. There's a reasonable hope that the economy will be strong going into the election next year. So, I think Biden is probably doing the right thing and using the presidency to promote, if you like, the sort of inevitability of his own position, while letting the Republicans fight it out. Yeah. Smart politics.
Absolutely. Philip, maybe to conclude, first of all, I hope that in the next few weeks we might have you back here on Governance This Week to look at other developments. But for those who are interested, on Monday actually, you have an interesting event about an emerging new world order here at the School of Transnational Governance. Can you tell us 2 words about that?
Yeah, first of all, it's going to be a great event. There are some great speakers, some who will be here in Florence, some who will be contributing remotely, not least the director of the SDG, Alex Dubb, but people like, Fiona Hill, who worked in the White House as the Russia director, Sylvie Berman, a former French ambassador to both to Moscow and to Beijing, and other sort of great experts. And here's the point. What the Ukraine war has done has sort of crystallized the fact that the old post-Cold War order, if you want to see, has gone. The Pax Americana that we relied upon for decades has passed. And we're seeing the emergence of a new order. But we don't quite yet know what it's going to look like. Is it going to be, for example, a new order defined by the rivalry between the US and China? Is there going to be a broader confrontation between China and Russia and maybe Iran and 1 or 2 others on one side and the world's democracies on the other? Where is the global south going to sit in this new landscape? I mean, it's striking since the Ukraine war that not many of these countries support Vladimir Putin, but not many of them have been prepared to take action against him. So what I'm sure we will do at this event on Monday is to analyse and explore and hopefully debate, because this final point is that we've got to look at is how, to what extent will values, I would say values that we should share across the world, such as freedom, the rule of law, democracy, what part will they play in this emerging order? Is it all going to be about interests? Is it all going to be about what countries can grab from each other, or spheres of influence? So I'm hoping and I'm sure we will have a great discussion and debate about those subjects.
Excellent. I'm already looking forward to it, and our viewers can follow the link in description and join the debate online as well. Philip, thanks again for being with us. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's been great.